Welcome to MarketMindLab. Every single day, massive companies succeed or entirely fail, and global markets rise or collapse, all based on just a few hidden psychological triggers. In this explainer, we're going to explore one of the absolute most fascinating corners of business psychology, the luxury market. We're going to dive into how human behavior, our deeply hidden biases, and this desperate, hardwired need for belonging completely dictate the success or failure of high-end brands. We aren't just looking at what people buy. We're going to uncover exactly why they make these decisions and how those choices ripple out through the entire global economy.
Okay, let's just jump right in with a number that really should instantly short-circuit any rational economic brain. $10,000. I mean, imagine dropping 10 grand on a simple leather bag. From a purely functional standpoint, that is a terrible business decision. You can carry your groceries or your laptop in a $20 canvas tote just as effectively, and honestly, probably with a lot less anxiety. The materials and the labor, they just don't add up to $10,000. So paying this much contradicts literally all rational economic logic. And yet, this market is absolutely booming. The problem here is that our normal rules of supply and demand seem to be completely broken.
Which brings us to the core mystery we really need to solve today. Why do we completely toss logic out the window just to buy status? In standard business theory, when the price of an item goes up, the demand for it is supposed to fall. That's a fundamental law. But in luxury markets, the high price is exactly what creates the desire. If you suddenly slash the price of that $10,000 bag in half, the very people who wanted it might actually lose interest entirely. We have to figure out what psychological assumptions are driving this completely irrational market behavior.
Well, this brilliantly illustrates something economists call the Veblen paradox. Way back in 1899, an economist named Thorstein Veblen noticed something kind of strange about the wealthy elite. They weren't buying products for their quality or the utility. No, they were buying things specifically to prove they could afford to waste the money. He coined the phrase conspicuous consumption, and what started as this small, exclusive club for old money nobility has completely exploded into a $200 billion global signaling system. Today, this isn't just some weird anomaly, it is the foundational business strategy for the world's most profitable fashion houses.
Part 1. The Digital Society Experiment.
Recently, researchers at Google DeepMind decided they wanted to test this Veblen paradox. They wanted to strip away all the human messiness and isolate the pure decision-making mechanics behind luxury. To do this, they built a truly fascinating AI simulation. Picture this: 50 AI agents dropped into a simulated version of Los Angeles. And these weren't just simple lines of code. They were programmed with distinct jobs, their own memories, personalities, and digital money to spend. At the very start of the experiment, these agents were kept totally isolated from one another. And without anyone watching them, they acted exactly like rational machines. They maximized their utility. They only bought basic food and functional gadgets. Just logical, fear-free, bias-free purchasing decisions. But then, the researchers threw the ultimate market disruptor into the mix: social context. They let the agents interact. They actually sent them out on first dates. And the exact moment the simulation changed was when these agents suddenly had to perceive each other. Now, they were seeing their peers wearing Rolex watches and carrying Chanel handbags. Overnight, the psychological environment had completely shifted from isolated survival to complex social navigation.
And here is what's truly fascinating. The AI agents didn't even have a pre-programmed status function. The researchers never told them to be greedy or status-obsessed. Instead, the agents were simply operating on the theory of appropriateness. They were just trying to make decisions to complete social patterns based on what people like us do. This proves something massive for business leaders. Our market decisions are rarely about maximizing profit or utility. They are fundamentally driven by the social pressures of just wanting to act appropriately within our chosen tribe.
Which brings us to Part 2, the price run-up.
The market consequences of this one simple psychological shift were absolute chaos. As soon as these AI agents realized their peers had luxury items, aggressive bidding wars kicked off. The simulation's marketplace just exploded. Items that had zero functional value suddenly became the absolute most sought-after goods in the digital economy. Take a look at what happened with one specific item: the Labubu doll. Yes, a sophisticated digital economy was brought to its knees by a plastic toy. With absolutely no historical prestige, no premium materials, no functional use, its isolated base utility was basically zero. But the exact moment social context was introduced and agents saw others holding it, its value tripled in a matter of days. It achieved Veblen status in real time purely because of collective observation.
The crucial takeaway here is captured perfectly in this quote. They weren't buying the toy, they were buying social approval.
The higher the price of that Labubu doll went, the more the agents desperately wanted it. Paying that absurd price was the mechanism they used to signal to the other agents that they understood the unwritten rules of their social game. The financial consequence? A massive bubble, driven entirely by the fear of missing out and this deep-seated desire to belong.
Part 3. The Influencer Disruption.
But markets are never static, right? Just as the simulation reached peak luxury obsession, the researchers introduced a totally new variable, a new conflict. Influencers. These specific AI agents were injected into the environment and began aggressively calling mainstream luxury items, like those Chanel bags, inauthentic and basic. What followed was rapid market fragmentation. We started at pure utility, moved to mainstream luxury, and then hit market saturation, where suddenly everyone had the Chanel bag. Once the influencers labeled it inauthentic, the market crashed for that item and a new high-price subculture instantly formed. The influencers started valorizing hipster items, specifically vintage film cameras. Literally overnight, the digital elite abandoned the mainstream and flocked to these cameras, creating a totally new, highly expensive market sector.
This digital behavior perfectly mirrors human markets through what economists call the snob effect. When a brand makes the strategic decision to prioritize mass growth, their items just become too common. The consequence? The true elites abandon the brand altogether. They pivot to quiet luxury, items with out-loud logos, items that act almost like secret handshakes. They want to differentiate themselves from the masses with signals that only true insiders can actually read. The exact moment a brand becomes accessible, it completely loses its psychological power over the elite buyer.
Part 4. The brain's conflict. Okay, so we've seen the digital simulation, but let's dive into the actual biological proof, because this isn't just about AI algorithms. This is deeply, deeply wired into human neurology. Let's talk about actual EEG brain scans of human consumers processing luxury status, just to see what happens under the hood when we make these purchasing decisions. When researchers showed people a counterfeit bag, an item with a cheap price tag but a prominent, flashy logo, the EEG scans lit up with intense conflict. There is a deep cognitive mismatch happening there. When the brain sees a cheap price, it naturally assumes functional utility. When it sees a luxury logo, it instantly expects high status and exclusivity. When those two things are mashed together in a fake product, our brain genuinely short-circuits. We are so heavily wired to expect price and status to perfectly align that breaking that rule causes literal emotional tension in our minds. And this leads right to the psychological tightrope that we all walk. We are constantly navigating between authentic pride, which is that nice internal feeling of earned achievement, and hubristic pride, which is using external items for arrogance and social signaling. We use luxury as a tool to manage our own self-esteem. We're perpetually caught in this massive behavioral conflict. The desperate desire to fit in with the group, violently clashing with the need to stand out and signal superiority.
Part 5. The Psychology of Belonging.
Which brings us to the final, unifying lesson of this explainer. When we connect the wild market disruption of the DeepMind AI with those EEG scans of the human brain, we arrive at the absolute core truth of why luxury businesses actually succeed: the psychology of belonging. Here are the brutal takeaways. First, luxury is a social contagion. The success of a brand is rarely about the objective quality of the leather, it is almost entirely about who we watch using it. Second, the snob effect guarantees that the fashion industry will remain in a state of permanent flux. Brands have to constantly innovate or die because their very success makes them undesirable to their core elite market. And finally, these purchases are, more often than not, a coping mechanism. They provide this quick dopamine rush that temporarily masks deeper insecurities, often resulting in a pretty severe crush of imposter syndrome once that initial thrill wears off.
The digital agents prove that literally any object, whether it's a $10,000 leather bag or a random plastic doll, can become a luxury status symbol if enough people just agree to play the game. You aren't buying leather or plastic, you are buying a feeling of belonging to a specific tier of society. So I want to leave you with a provocative thought, looking directly at your own purchasing psychology. The very next time you feel that intense, irresistible pull to buy something incredibly expensive, pause and ask yourself, do you actually love the product? Or are you just trying to complete the pattern? Let us know what you think in the comments. Thanks so much for joining us for this explainer, and we'll see you next time on MarketMindLab.